Okay, so today we're going to continue in music section 3. This is the section all about propaganda. And we're on page 96 of the Music Resource Guide. So we're going to start talking about Louis Armstrong as one of the ambassadors in this propaganda war related to jazz. So here's an interesting quote about Louis Armstrong. The Stockholm correspondent to the New York Times told the paper's readership that America's secret weapon is a blue note in a minor key, which is a way of talking about jazz. And he called Armstrong its most effective ambassador. Louis Armstrong was just super friendly and funny. He was well liked. His nickname was Satchmo. So here's an album name that was released, including recordings just from his tour from the State Department. And it's called Ambassador Satch. That's the name of his album that he released after the fact. Going back to talking about the nickname of Louis Armstrong, his common nickname, I never knew this, I found it interesting. He was called Satchmo, and his friends teased him because they said he had a mouth that was as big as a satchel or a bag. So when you see images of him playing, you can't see it in this one as much, but his cheeks were known for really, really puffing out. That's just kind of the way he would play, with these really, really puffed out cheeks. Just as a hint, this is not the nickname you're looking for if you're doing the crossword exercise. That'll come up after a little bit. So here is some of the stuff that Louis Armstrong did. He and his band members, they were really, really popular. They would break into these impromptu sessions with people just standing outside waiting for his concerts to begin. People really, really liked that. But they had a hard time actually organizing getting Louis Armstrong to go on these State Department tours. This had a lot to do with racial segregation and racial tensions in the United States. So Louis Armstrong refused to do certain things. And the State Department wanted him to do certain things, and those were not always lining up. So they wanted to get Louis Armstrong on this ambassadorship tour for a long, long time, and it didn't quite work out. Then in history, we have this Brown versus Board of Education decision. This decision in 1954 says that racially separate schools are not equal. Arkansas was going to have to desegregate. And what happens is Arkansas's governor refuses to desegregate, and so the Arkansas National Guard surrounds this high school campus in Little Rock. And Louis Armstrong is very angry, understandably so. So he's angry about this situation and refuses to comply with what the State Department wants him to do until we figure out what we're doing with all of these issues with race. This stuff goes on for some time. We do see here Louis Armstrong still at this point in the story is not a formal ambassador for the State Department, but he's talking about things going on in the United States when he's traveling to Venezuela. And they ask him, how are things for Black people in the United States? And he says, well, the situation in general is far better than it used to be, despite what happened in Little Rock. So Louis Armstrong tries really hard to follow this role. Eventually, he does get put on tour. Before he successfully goes on tour, though, other jazz musicians were also being selected to go. One of them, who was notable, is Dizzy Gillespie. Dizzy Gillespie's jazz group was the first one to actually become part of the State Department's cultural presentations program. Let's see. Dropping down to page 99. So to just reiterate some of this disconnect between what the State Department wanted and what these African American ambassadors were prioritizing, sometimes what was happening is their fellow musicians, their fellow African American friends, they would criticize these Black musicians for agreeing to go along with what was being required of them, and they were called a name that's not very kind. It's called an Uncle Tom, and an Uncle Tom is a person who kind of gives in to white people. It's based on the character Tom in Uncle Tom's Cabin. So, you know, the people like Louis Armstrong and Dizzy Gillespie, while they were forwarding their people through this work they were doing, sometimes their friends did not feel like it was a wise move to make. Okay, talking some more about Dizzy Gillespie here. When they were on tour, it's important for you guys to know they worked very hard to make these tours educational. And then we're going to start talking about another jazz artist or blues artist who also went abroad for the State Department. And this is where we start bringing in Dave Brubeck and his wife Iola. They start to use this educational aspect of touring to help people understand jazz as its own art form. So now dropping down to page 100, they're calling these guys jam ambassadors. It's kind of fun, or jazz ambassadors. So the Brubecks are really, really popular. Their music is pretty interesting. It's good. The State Department hopes to use Brubeck's popular, and also now it's integrated, meaning that there are both blacks and whites in Dave Brubeck's ensemble. And they're hoping to undo some of that damage to the image of the United States done by the incident at Little Rock. Remembering that Little Rock, Arkansas was the high school where the governor refused to integrate and the National Guard was brought in. This continues to have some challenges going on. Some places don't like the idea of letting colleges play, or letting mixed groups play in their colleges or in their schools. This is while they're touring in the United States. So they're having success overseas, but not being allowed to tour completely in the United States. That's reflected here. They go on this tour down south to college campuses, and only 3 schools allowed the Brubeck ensemble to play. They wouldn't let all of them play together. And Dave Brubeck, to his credit, he canceled the whole tour. He said, "Fine, if you're not going to let us play, then we're done. We're not gonna play this game anymore." So this brings us to our next listening sample, The Real Ambassadors and Remember Who You Are. So these ambassadors, they didn't always like having to do the work that the State Department wanted them to do. There were lots of requirements placed on them. They had to act a certain way. In addition to all of this racial overtone crap that they were having to deal with, there was this list of things they were supposed to and not supposed to do. That's where this performance, this musical play, comes into the story. And the show is called The Real Ambassadors. And the listening piece that we're going to take is a piece from The Real Ambassadors. The name of the song is Remember Who You Are. Some of the pieces I want you to gather from the listening guide here. Vamp. Vamping is in the very beginning of the song. I'll point that out when we get to that on the listening time. The next one is this term stop time. The band plays a really, really short, sharp downbeat note every 2 bars, and then there's silent. I'll point that out as well. All right, so here is Remember Who You Are. This is vamping that you're hearing right now.
Remember who you are and what you represent.
This is Louis Armstrong singing in the background. He has a very identifiable, gravelly voice.
What you do, the eyes of the world are watching you. Remember who you are and what you represent. Represent.
There's a chorus in the background saying, you have to represent us. You have to do what we ask you to do. This is what you're hearing right now. That's stop time. Do you hear that? Bam. Bam. Comes up again here. Alright, here we go. This is no longer Louis Armstrong, by the way. That's that stop time.
Remember who you are and what you represent. Represent.
Here comes Louis again. You can hear his voice on there. It's so distinctive. Did you hear that? That's a glissando in the trombone. Wow, wow, wow. Gets quieter, diminuendo.
Remember who you are and what you represent. Jelly rolling bases helps us to invent a weapon that no other nation has, especially the Russians can't claim jazz. Remember who you are and what you represent. 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 Represent.